All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Jenkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jigar Shah today for the keynote discussion after lunch here to bring you all back. Jigar is the director of the Loans Program Office and formerly CEO at Generate Capital, where he worked to mobilize infrastructure investment in clean energy solutions. He formerly, before that, was at SunEdison and the Carbon War Room, which worked to organize all kinds of actors to tackle the biggest challenges in decarbonization. And we're very excited to have him here today to talk about what has been going on at the Biden administration and in the Department of Energy. It's been a busy year in Washington, D.C. If you haven't been paying attention to the news out of Congress, we've got some good news for a change out of Congress, which is exciting. And really some pretty momentous shifts in the policy landscape for clean energy. And Jigar's at the front lines of that, working at the Loan Programs Office to help mobilize capital and get a variety of technologies up to the $100 billion scale. That's the sort of tipping point that Jigar's been focused on, and we'd love to unpack that with you while we're here. But join me in welcoming Jigar to start with, and we'll jump into conversation after that. So, Jigar, give us your sort of news clip version of the update. So it's been a big year. We've got a lot of policies that have fallen into place. A lot of work going on in the Department of Energy. Kind of give us the high-level update for those who haven't been following along too closely.
Well, I think for the first time in a long time, folks are optimistic, which is good.
Yeah.
So, I think as many of you may know, we passed a historic, bipartisan infrastructure law last year, and then the Inflation Reduction Act this year. Along the way, there was the CHIPS Act and several other acts in the middle there. And I think with all of that together, it really provides the full set of tools required to really start to change the way in which we think about commercialization of technology, right? I think as the president's talked about many times, we have to start building things here again. We have to start training workers. We have to start doing big things again. And, lo and behold, a lot of that knowledge has been lost, right? And so we have to bring it back. And so figuring out how we take all these different pieces and actually put them back together in some sort of semblance that attracts capital, I think has, been difficult, but, a worthy task.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's quite a worthy task. So we often have kind of these, simplified debates about the role of government, the role of the private sector. Big government is the problem, big government is the solution, and I think there's a broader, more nuanced economic, philosophy or strategy at play here. If you tend to take the sum of the parts here of the different bills and what the Biden administration's been trying to do. So, can you break down what that strategy looks like and kind of how you see the private sector and the public sector kind of working together? What's their role, respectively here to bring new technologies to the fore and to get them to scale so we can actually cut carbon emissions to the levels that we need?
Yeah, I think. For a long time, people have pointed to other countries for, commercialization strategies. I think the U.S. has been relatively quiet in terms of describing its commercialization technologies. But I think it is pretty clear that the U.S. Insists on the private sector leading and the government enabling, right? And so one of the things that frustrates people, I think, though, is we do expect that leadership to come first, right? And so if that leadership isn't there, then the government enablement falls flat, right? Yeah. So if you take, for instance, low-impact hydro, right, where we've had tax credits for a long time, $1 billion in cash from the bipartisan infrastructure law, you've got additional incentives in IRA, but if there aren't any people developing projects or other things, it doesn't magically appear. We don't do the Atomic Energy Commission like we did, back in the 50s and 60s. And so if the private sector doesn't show up, then all the government enablement in the world sort of falls flat, right? And so then the question becomes how does the private sector show up, right? And so right now, the way we're doing it is you end up with 20 plus sectors that we have to get to scale to decarbonize. Of those 20 plus sectors, we have about 12 where we've received billions of dollars of loan applications. And so those 12 clearly have commercial interest. Yeah. Somebody developed a project in hydrogen or transmission or carbon sequestration and storage or nuclear or whatever it is, right? And then some of the other sectors we have no applications in. And, and you can say, well, that's because, these two things are still remaining, permitting reform, whatever it is. There may be other things, but one of the things I would say is that I do think that the the discipline around the private sector, which is not really the private sector as much as it is growth companies and then infrastructure investors, right? And those are the two groups that folks don't really talk to, right? So growth companies don't have lobbyists in DC.
Yeah.
And
Too
so,
busy growing.
right, so they don't provide any feedback whatsoever to the federal government around how to implement all these programs, right? And the infrastructure investors are at the end of the game, right? So there's a lot of people who talk to venture capital, private equity, maybe even pension funds. But the infrastructure investors, who are the ones who provide gargantuan amounts of money, which is what we need to decarbonize things at scale, they sort of wait until the very end of the process. So if you ask them for their opinion, they're like, well, we actually haven't even thought about it, right? Because we haven't evaluated a deal, right? And so then when you're the government and you're saying, well, I have all these pieces, and you're sort of Apollo 13ing it, like where you've got like all the stuff on the table and you're trying to figure out how to make it work, right? Then, you're saying, well, who's supposed to give me real-time feedback from the private markets? Well, the folks who are at the table are the Fortune 500 companies, and they generally don't want to do anything, right? They're sort of saying, I have a dividend yield that I have to pay out, and so I'll do innovative stuff as long as it doesn't affect my core business, right? And so I'm like, well, that's not the right opinion to get. And so then you end up with this wait, where do I go, right? And so I think one of the things that we've done a very good job of, mostly my team, is getting growth companies to engage, right? And I think that has been something that we're uniquely proud of, is we have over 1,000 growth companies that we've been able to engage with over the last 18 months. And we've been able to engage them at the CEO and CFO level, so that it's not like a regulatory affairs person or whatever, which is not a bad person, but they don't allocate capital, right? And so it's still confusing, honestly, but it's good and it's intentional, right? Whereas in the past, I think we were like, well, here's a bunch of tax credits, I hope it works out for you, right? I think this time it's very intentional, and we're doing a lot of mapping. I'll give you one example. For the Solar Energy Manufacturing Act, right? So where we have credits to bring manufacturing of solar back to the United States. There's clearly lots of applications coming in for cell and module manufacturing, and that's sort of something that has been publicly announced. But there's very little that's happened in ingot and wafering, and then in polysilicon. And so I think traditionally people would just say, well, I guess there's no interest. But today, we're actually making phone calls and going like, why aren't you doing this? What else do you need? Like, how does this work? Oh, you need cheap electricity. Oh, this group isn't giving it to you. Let's find something else. So there's actually an intentional effort, which I don't think was there in the past.
Yeah, to put all the pieces together and kind of think about the barriers. So talk a little bit more specifically about LPO's role, the Loan Programs Office. You got a number of different loan programs that are wrapped up underneath that umbrella. Talk through a little bit of what tools do those provide for, say, a growth stage company that is trying to scale up to $1 billion or $100 billion scale?
Yeah, the thing about the Loan Programs Office, which is so interesting, is that we're at the end of the DOE process, right? And so there's a lot of people who come to me and say, I'm not getting any love for this technology. It's amazing. It can be $1 trillion scale. Why can't you help me? And I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm not the guy that can help you, right? So our average loan size that people are asking us for right now is $1 billion per loan, right? So you're at scale that is different than I think the rest of DOE, which is in that sort of
tens of millions kind of.
Tens of millions on the demonstration side, but then you've got grants and all the other stuff, right, for research and development. So I think part of the challenge for us is really separating us from the innovation part of DOE, not because we don't benefit from it, we benefit from it greatly, but it's on a slightly different time trajectory. I think for a long time, people thought that it was a straight line from sort of ARPA-E to demonstration grants to LPO.
Just hand you off down the line.
Right, and what you find is that the time scale difference between the two is probably 20 years, right? That when you look at, I would say, having looked at every ARPA-E grant, only one company has made it to LPO, right, in the entire time of ARPA-E. And we don't see a lot more coming, right? So they're actually on different time scales, right? Because the time scale of LPO is project finance, right? So it's the technology has to be proven, of which we have many, many, many technologies at DOE that are in that camp. But then the ecosystem has to be there. So you have to have feedstock, offtake agreements, a regulatory construct that is sort of supportive, and then people who actually know how to operate the machines, right? So if you don't have anybody trained to operate the machines or maintain them, then we're not going to get paid back over 20 years. And so there's a level of harshness that comes, through our office, and we've hired a lot of people that sort of help facilitate that, so it's a little less harsh. But the funny thing is that, I mean, we're child's play compared to the commercial bank market, right? And it's this really weird thing where a lot of applicants come in and they're like, wow, Jigar, you guys have a very high bar for getting through the office. And I was like, our bar is only 75% of the bar you're gonna have to face for the second loan that you get for the second facility, right? And so that entire way of thinking is something that's completely different than what the government does, right? And so just to get more esoteric for you, so LPO does project finance. Project finance is something that, frankly, no one knows about and no one probably cares.
Unpack that a little bit for folks.
Yeah, so if you think about real estate, right? There's a lot of people who wake up in the morning and say, I want to own 10 houses and I want to rent them out, et cetera, right? The reason you're able to do that is because you're confident that you can go to a bank and if you put up either your personal collateral or some collateral from somebody else, et cetera, the bank will give you an 80% loan and, you'll have this asset that's backing it, right? And so, so if you don't really have a lot of money, you could probably get into the real estate business, right? In the project finance business is very similar. So the question becomes if you put a solar, power purchase agreement together with Princeton University, and then you went to a bank, they would say, oh, Princeton's good for it, you can do that. Oh, you hired this, contractor who has a good reputation, so they're likely to finish the project, et cetera. Then you probably can get away with doing that whole thing just by signing a contract, right? The vast majority of the entire finance space is credit-based finance, right? So when you go to the Treasury Department or the Federal Reserve or the SEC, they're all dealing with credit. And even your local bank is basically saying, have you been in business at least 5 years? Do you have profits for that entire 5 years, right? Do you actually have cash flows? What are your ratios? All that stuff, right? And that's all credit finance. And so then the question becomes, if we scale up all these innovations through credit finance, then by definition, you're only doing it through Fortune 500 companies.
That have a big balance sheet and record, yeah.
Right? And we just established that those are the ones who are the laggards in getting it done, right? And so, so then how do you bridge that gap? Well, LPO bridges that gap, right? But people are worried. They're like, do you really know what you're doing? These are growth companies. What if they fail? How does that work? And so the level of education is a very high bar for us.
So how do you think about the failure tolerance at LPO? I mean, if those of ancient people like me remember Solyndra.
Sure.
Not sure. And the last time that the loan programs got, raked over the coals for, one project that went awry. So how do you think about that? I mean, a venture capitalist, even a bank, is going to tolerate some amount of failure in their portfolio. What level of risk tolerance should the government be taking here with LPO, and how do you address that?
Yeah, I think there has to be some acknowledgement that Solyndra was a mistake, right? It wasn't just a failure. It was one that, we had 12 employees at the time.
Yeah, it moved really quickly.
It moved very quickly, and, I think many people think that we shouldn't have done that deal. Today, I would say with all the reforms that we've done at LPO with 200 employees, that deal would have never made it through. Yeah. And so the deals that we lose money on now, which we still lose money on, we generally lose 30 or 40 cents on the dollar on these loans. It's not 100% on the dollar. And then even across all of those things, with the mistake that we made with Solyndra, that original portfolio only lost about 3.33% of the total capital out the door, which is roughly the same as a traditional bank commercial portfolio.
Right, which
so
almost maybe is not risky enough, given that
we absolutely get accused of not taking enough risk. Yeah. And so I think that's absolutely right. And so look, I think that you just keep putting one foot forward, and we're putting a lot of loans out the door. We've got 91 active loan applications that have come in seeking $93 billion now, and so we're certainly back in a big way, and to date we've had a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. For what we're doing, and we really do play an essential role in things that are very bipartisan, whether it's hydrogen, carbon sequestration, nuclear, et cetera. So there's obviously going to be heat that comes our way at some point, and we'll see how the political world reacts to it. But I think we've done the best we can to sort of be confident about our position.
Mm-hmm. So maybe break down the different programs that you have and what their job is, right? So you've got several different loan programs, each with a kind of a different mission.
Yeah.
Help people understand what those are and kind of what types of companies might get helped by each program.
Yeah, so we have two original programs, which is where the bulk of our volume is. So that's 1703, which is basically that project finance thing I was saying. Mm-hmm. The second one is Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, and that's where Tesla got their loan, Ford, Nissan. And in that case, we've still actually had a remarkably good track record, but we are by definition taking if you build it, they will come risk, right? Like you could imagine the Tesla Model S could have been a beautiful car that never sold, right? And then their next car could have been a dog, right? And so, like, even if their first car is great and we did due diligence on that, the next car is what determines whether they can pay us back. So, so we take that risk there. We also have the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program, which was just given to us a few years ago and was just enhanced.
A couple $100 million more, right?
Well, there's a couple $100 million more of overhead, but we have $20 billion of additional lending authority. So that's been fantastic to see, and the tribes also have direct pay now as well as a bonus tax credit, and so it does look like developing solar and wind projects with tribal ownership, whether on tribal land or outside of tribal land, will become the most profitable way to develop solar and wind, and so we're hopeful that a lot of wealth creation goes into tribes as a result.
If I can just cut in here. So for folks who don't track the nitty-gritty of tax finance and tax policy in DC, the loans or the tax credits that drive a bulk of the investment in wind and solar and other clean energy resources were revamped in the Inflation Reduction Act, and one of the really important but subtle changes is that nonprofit and government entities now can get direct payment of the tax credits without having to go through somebody with a tax liability that could monetize those credits. So in the past, municipal utilities, tribal governments, state governments, local school districts, none of those entities could take advantage of these tax credits very easily. Now it's very straightforward.
That's right.
And even private sector entities that, developers that had tax liability usually didn't have enough to claim the full value of these credits, and so it's such a big part of their revenue stream. So they would partner with big banks like, JP Morgan and Wells Fargo and others that would take on an equity role in the project to get the money for the tax credits. Now there's a transferability rule that you can just sell the tax credit to anyone else that has business tax liability. They don't have to be part of the project. So this is an important but subtle change that makes the tax credits much easier for a wide variety of entities to take credit or to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so I think the tribes are in a very good spot to use up that money. And then we have a new program we just launched, which is the CO2 pipelines program, which basically builds trunk lines across the country so that any industrial company that has CO2 emissions can concentrate their emissions, take it into a pipeline, and then have it safely sequestered.
And that's about building sort of a common carrier network, right? Not just individual spur lines.
That's exactly right. So that was launched last week, and then we have a new program called 1706, which is really taking existing energy infrastructure, so existing coal plants, natural gas plants, refineries, old pipelines, tank farms, and converting them to beneficial use in the energy transition for those communities. As many people know, those communities have 50, 60-year track records of property tax payments and people getting employed in those facilities, and figuring out how to get them to transition is a huge priority. And that program is very well funded. It's got $5 billion worth of what they call credit subsidy. It allows you to basically buy down the interest rate in the loan down to U.S. Treasuries plus 3/8. And so it basically is, quote unquote, a limited loan authority until that credit subsidy runs out. Mm-hmm. And so if we do very low risk things, we could probably get up to $250 billion of loans. And if we do high risk things, it'll be more like $50 billion in loans.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure law, it's all about sort of spending, right? Trying to mobilize a bunch of capital. And I think, when we look at broadly in our modeling and analysis at Princeton, it lines up a lot, right? We've got a lot of the things falling in place on the financial incentive side for the next decade.
Yeah.
But, and that's probably necessary, but not sufficient. So what are some of the other pinch points that you think about? I know that your main toolkit is a financial toolkit as well, but as you're thinking about that growth stage for companies, what are some of the other things that are potential pain points or bottlenecks that we have to be carefully focused on to be able to execute at the large scale and the pace that we need to get to the national goal of getting emissions down to half of our peak levels by 2030. That's really right around the corner. And then on to net zero by 2050.
So the Loan Programs Office, we talked about the fact that we have like $93 billion or so worth of loans that people have applied for. We have another, let's call it $1 trillion that are in pre-consultation with us. So as a result, we see a lot of what's happening. We know what business models people are pursuing. We know, roughly where the math works and where it doesn't work by technology. And what we're finding is that, from an industrial strategy point of view, while the spreadsheets make total sense, and I totally appreciate the work that you guys do, there has to be somebody who actually wants a project, right? And so I do think that we in this country have sort of, I think somehow been lulled to sleep through this notion that the polling works, or that that there's some sort of spreadsheet math equation, some sort of economic supply-demand curve that just sort of works, and that when you move the bar this way, more stuff happens. And the reality of the situation is there's a lot of people who save a ton of money with electric school buses that aren't applying for the money at EPA, right? There's a lot of people with rooftops that are beautiful for solar that are not putting solar on those rooftops, right? There's a lot of folks who have an old natural gas plant who doesn't know how to fill out the paperwork to figure out how to turn it into a sort of solar plus battery storage field, right? And so part of the reason why people are obsessed with solar and wind is not because it's a better technology, but because the proponents of solar and wind are far more competent and enthusiastic than other technologies, right? And so, and you see that regularly, right? Whether it's the geothermal space or the hydro space or the biomass space, you just have loads of incompetence, right? And so, and people will do this all the time. They'll be like, but Jigar, why can't this happen? And FERC streamlined the permitting process for a hydro dam, right? So now it's only 6 months if you want to repower a dam that was previously powered, right, but has gone into disrepair. And what I'll tell them is have you met someone who develops hydro projects? Right? They clearly don't actually even know what FERC is. And even if they did know what FERC was, they're not well capitalized, and they don't really know how to get through these things. And so it doesn't matter that you have this spreadsheet model that says that with these tax credits, et cetera, it's gonna work, right? So then the question becomes, what do we need to actually get that to happen, right? Well, you need, pick a number, 100,000 people who actually are developing $10 million worth of projects every year to get to $1 trillion worth of projects every year, right? And some of that is them actually doing the development work themselves, right? And going back to the real estate example, part of the reason why people do real estate is because when they go to their bank actually already recognizes them and knows what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a difficult process, right? So we have to make sure that happens, right? And then people understand the rules of the road so that they feel like they can make wealth creation. But then the other piece of it is that, for those people who are not, prone to development, then they need to understand that that there are these civic processes by which people make decisions, right? And the civic processes are captured by, folks who do certain things. For instance, the guy who runs the school bus fleet for your school, buys the same school bus from the Thomas or Bluebird distributor that's local, right? And if that person doesn't stock electric buses, they don't buy them, right? Because why? Because they have to call them, and they're the ones who do the maintenance and all this other thing, right? They don't want to create an entirely new infrastructure and architecture and wait, what's vehicle-to-grid technology, and how do I actually do this stuff? And so you could imagine them saying, well, I don't want to do this. And so then, you've got to get a person from the community to go to the school board and say, hey, why are you not doing this? There's these rebates, et cetera. I mean, we just went through this in my own county, in Montgomery County. It took us 3 years. And this is a county where the executive is left of Bernie Sanders and declared a climate emergency 4 years ago when he was on the city council and hasn't done shit, in the entire county, right? And so you're in this situation where everyone's well, but Jigar, you've got these laws that passed, right?
Yeah.
But unless a bunch of people who were trying to pass the laws, right, and writing letters and doing that stuff, now find it to be an extraordinary experience to go to city council meetings once a month, it's not going to happen, right? I'll give you another example, police cars. Police cars idle because they have a lot of electronics. So they have a 3 mile per gallon thing, right? And you see this, when I drop my son off to the school that he goes to, there's a police car that sits there, and it's running all the time, right? And so if moving to an electric vehicle is a 3-year payback for police cars, right? And it's the reddest police districts that have moved to all Teslas and whatever else, right? But the vast majority of folks haven't made that switch because obviously no one asked.
So we need activists or organizers to kind of go out and turn themselves to just evangelizing all the solutions available? Is that sort of what you're saying? Or is that a role for government? Do we need a concierge service that's making this super easy for somebody? Or,
yeah, I mean, well, we need all the above, right? So government can play a certain role. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, we have 3.2% of our detached homes in the United States have solar on them. 30% of detached homes in Australia have solar on them.
Yep.
When you hear our government speak, I don't think we ever talk about distributed generation or rooftop solar. And so we always talk about utility scale wind or solar, right? And even in your analyses or NREL's Clean Futures, they never talk about DG,
kind of buried, yeah.
right? And so, but in the actual analysis that Princeton did, it's very clear in bold letters that without demand flexibility and DER programs, there's no chance this is going to happen, right? It says it right there, but we never talk about it, right? So that's one thing, is we can talk about it. So the government has that role. I think but the other thing that we talked about with real estate is, and with real estate, you literally have people who fill up auditoriums like this talking to people about how they can make a crap load of money in real estate.
Right.
Right? You've got all sorts of folks, and you pay $395 to attend, and you get these books. Well, we need the same thing.
All right.
That's how this works.
This is good. All right.
Right? But I mean, if you're going to put solar on, pick a number, right? Something on the order of 20 million households, right? Plus rooftops. I think NREL estimates the potential at roughly 400 gigawatts, right, on rooftops. Right? It's a huge number. It's a huge amount of money, right? And then that doesn't count the electric vehicles for police cars and school buses and heavy trucks and all the other things, right? And so I get the fact that a lot of the people who've gotten us here are very intellectual and feel very sort of we have solved this problem. We think we know how to do it. We created a computer software program where you can test kids
about me.
as to whether they know how to do it. Well, I don't know if you've seen that Financial Times game that everyone played.
Yeah.
So but they think that they've somehow finished their work by creating this game on the Financial Times, right? But and this as well as I do. We are in a situation where Ukraine, crisis has made this very real for everybody.
Yeah.
And we are again all of the above because we have to be. And one of the ways to solve this problem in Europe is for everyone to take their average thermostat setting from 23 degrees down to 19, right? But 19 means you're wearing sweaters and flannel all day, right? And people don't want to wear sweaters and flannel all day.
Unless they're from Oregon, and then it's totally fine.
Sure, but but it's a weird thing. I mean, Americans for sure, but even Europeans and Westerners broadly view that level of sacrifice as unacceptable, right? And we're moving into climate change, right? And so I mean, I do think that there is a lack of appreciation for the cultural aspects of how this is going to roll out, right? And I don't mean that we all need to participate in shared sacrifice. I do think the technologies exist for people to live a modern lifestyle and decarbonize. And
the Ukraine situation is a very unique short-term crisis as well. So
sure, but I do think that the notion of demand destruction of oil, right, and getting us to use less than 100 million barrels a day and getting it all the way down is something that, frankly, I don't think the oil and gas industry are against. I mean, I think they view drilling in the Arctic and drilling tar sands to be a pain, and they'd rather there not be all this extra demand. But when you think about what it takes to do all that stuff, right, passing gas bans in cities or figuring out how to get states to move to banning electric, internal combustion engine cars or by X date, I mean, there's dealerships, there's this group, there's that group, there's all these things, right? And so it doesn't really matter what your area of expertise is, whether it's policy or finance or academia or other things. There's lots of ways that people can be of assistance, but I think for people to believe that a law is passed or a law has even been implemented, right, and all the rules are done or et cetera, without this ground game of folks that are actually working to make these things happen, it's definitely not going to work.
I think we need to update the Schoolhouse Rock videos about how a bill becomes a law, and then all this stuff, right? So let's talk a little bit about the role of the U.S. in sort of global supply chains around these clean energy industries. So, you kind of often mention that there's a new solar manufacturing tax credit. I'm not sure if folks know that.
Sure.
There's a broad range of tax credits for manufacturing clean energy components and EV components in the U.S. There's the loan program, like ATVM, the Advanced Technology Vehicles Loan Program. There's additional grants in IRA for retooling auto manufacturing. There's, efforts to bonus tax credits if you use domestic content. So there's sort of a broad industrial strategy, as Brian Deese calls it, not industrial policy, but broader strategy here that's at play. Talk a little bit about what that signifies, the shift there, and maybe the role that you've been thinking about at LPO and financing some of that shift.
Yeah, I think that, I think it goes to what I was saying before, which is that in every commercialization that's been successful, it's roughly $100 billion, right? So you start with a technology that works, and then you have first-of-a-kind deployment at commercial scale. You've got engineering excellence where you get the system optimized from an engineering standpoint. You then have the learning curve, right, which everyone seems to be familiar with these days. And then you have Wall Street securitization, which I think people forget about, right? And so then you get to full market acceptance, right? The solar and wind industry sort of got there, but they got there in this sort of weird way, right? Because there was so much support fiscally from Japan, Germany, then Spain, then California, that the US was like, oh yeah, this just kind of stuff just happens and we can just be 5 years late to every party. Yeah. And so that's fine. So we did onshore wind, then we did offshore wind after 7 years after the Europeans did it.
Yeah.
And so that's great. But even in offshore wind, when you think about it, it's not really working, right? The first 2 projects that are going in right now are basically money losers for the companies that are doing it.
Yeah, we have to build an entire new ecosystem here around offshore wind, servicing and manufacturing installation. Yeah.
Right. Now you have vessel financing that people have to worry about. We haven't built a ship that's been cost effective on a global scale in 35, 40 years. And so, an average ship made in Korea is probably half the price of one made here.
And yet the Jones Act doesn't allow us to use that ship
here
in the US, right?
And so then the question becomes you can change the Jones Act hard, or you can actually see how America rises to the occasion and learns how to make ships, right? And so then how do you do that? You got to find somebody who actually wants to buy a port, right, from Italy or some other place that actually knows how to make ships. And then that group then has to train those port workers on how to do that, right? And so you can start to see how much intervention needs to happen to actually make these things occur. And in the backdrop of this, right, is President Obama, who's like, I'm not going to hire anybody who knows anything about anything because I'm not going to hire lobbyists, right? So now, you've got a whole bunch of people who've dedicated their lives to understanding how things work who are not allowed to work in the government, right? And so you're in this weird situation where, people are trained in the government not to get involved in these things because they're like, this is ethically challenged. We can't get involved with this. We can't actually talk to an Italian ship maker and have them buy this port. We can't suggest anything to them. We're just going to put out a set of requirements and put out an RFP and hope that somebody bids on it, right? And magically sees it across their desk in Italian. And so, it's this weird thing, right? And no industry is worse about this than nuclear, right? When you think about nuclear, right, we have the Vogtle nuclear plant that loaded fuel today.
Yeah. Big day.
So you can clap on that. That's cool. 12 years later,
About time.
We're getting there.
Yep.
And then and so now you go to Dominion or Duke or some of these other, the governor of Virginia just said that he wanted to take those 2 plants in Southwest Virginia and coal plants, turn them into nuclear, right? Great. So now the question becomes which design do you pick, right? Do you do another AP1000? Probably not. Now you're going to small modular nuclear reactors. Now you have GE. You've got Holtec, you've got NuScale, right? Never mind, this is all new information for me, so just I'm regurgitating stuff. But never mind the fact that none of those 3 companies actually builds anything, right? So GE, NuScale, and Holtec actually has designed something. So it's you're building a house, you go on, floorplans.com, you buy a set of floor plans and you pay $75, right? That's who NuScale, GE, and Holtec are, right? So they basically go through the NRC, so they got to go through 2 years of NRC and they got to get approval and all that stuff.
Stamped, yep.
But in the GE Hitachi case, you have a company called BWRX. And now BWRX is the one who actually makes these things, and they generally serve the military, right? And so fine. So now they're going to create all of these supply chains and figure out who's going to make the valves and all these things and put that together, right? But they're not actually constructing anything, right? So now the question is, who's going to construct it? So in our country, TVA actually has a construction group. They just finished Watts Bar. So they're going to try to build the first 2 GE Hitachi plants, right? But I've asked them, I'm when that's over, are you going to build the plants for Dominion?
Yeah.
No.
That's
okay.
not our job. Yeah.
Well, then who's going to do that? So then I got to go out and call Hyundai from Korea because they sort of like to do these things. And they're well, how do we learn? And then I have to ask TVA.
Can you work together? Yeah.
Do you want to work together? Do you want to look over their shoulder while they're building their thing? Now you're getting a sense of industrial strategy.
Yeah.
And all along the way, I have lawyers coming to me saying, Jigar, what you're doing, I think it might be illegal, right? And so, so you can imagine how hard this is for us to actually do industrial strategy, right? It's a great soundbite, and we talk about it, but then you're like, oh crap, can I actually will offshore wind vessels into existence? Can I will the nuclear industry into existence? What about sustainable aviation fuel? I'll give you an example there, right? So in sustainable aviation fuel, we have all of these airlines who are buying the fuel. Never mind that the airlines are constantly going bankrupt. So nobody actually wants to finance something with them as the offtake agreement, right? Yeah. But all of the credits are being generated by filling an airplane at LAX or SFO, because there's a special program in the state of California called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Credit Program, right? But if you go to LAX or SFO and say, hey, why don't you aggregate all the credits? Right. Because anyway, it's a credit scheme. It's not like that drop of fuel is going into United Jet. It's just getting mixed into the fuel tank, right? So then everyone's basically getting a piece. So then why don't you do it and then just sell the credits to United and Delta the same way, right? Oh, I don't know if we want to do that. We're an airport authority, et cetera. And so every single thing that we want to do in every single sector requires another 10 conversations, right? And the vast majority of people that work in the government, who are amazing, by the way, don't have this experience base, right? And so then you're like, well, where do I get those people from? Who actually wants to work for the government and carry around this business card to have these conversations, right? And then some of these folks, of course, are in the private sector, and then they're having the conversations, but folks don't trust them. So it's an interesting...
You need 1,000 facilitators just to go around and figure out what needs to get solved.
Exactly right. I mean, and you see it just with this university, right? Think about how close you guys are here to actually decarbonizing the campus, right? The buses that go around, having enough electric vehicle chargers at all of your parking garages, making sure that all of your buildings are net zero, right? I mean, you see how hard it is here. Yeah. You guys have the best experts in the world.
Yep. So let's maybe talk a little bit about state governments as well. So there's some folks here from New Jersey and I think others. What role does state governments play in this sort of ecosystem, and how do you think they can fill maybe some of these gaps, given that they're more tied into the local ecosystem around some of these things?
It's another good question with a complicated answer. So you have a state government. New Jersey has been progressive in ways that really no other state has been since 2002 or so, when they really passed their RPS and the rec markets for solar and all these other things, right? And so you have this thing where you have utilities. Utilities have obligations to buy these credits. They've somehow do some of these things. You have a board of public utilities that sort of regulates them, right? But then separately, you have a state energy office. So the heat pump money that we have, right? That money gets formula granted to the state energy office, right? Separately, the electric utility companies have rebate programs that they run, right? For all these things. And so now you say to them, gosh, you guys really should coordinate. But, the question is the state energy office, do they coordinate with BPU? Not really. Does the BPU coordinate with the utilities? They're just spend the money properly and let's not get anybody in trouble. And then, then you've got a bunch of other folks who say, well, we should make sure that we put in income caps for these credits, right? Now, never mind that nobody actually knows how to implement these income caps, because the credits are supposed to be done at the point of sale. So if you buy it at Best Buy, is Best Buy going to check your IRS tax records, right? And so, how does this work, right? But those are the rules that got passed, right? And then I separately have, loan guarantees that we're putting out for virtual power plants, right? So we've got these big fintech companies that are probably doing, I don't know, in the state of New Jersey, they're probably doing $100 million a month of business, right? The total amount of formula grants that are going to the state of New Jersey for heat pumps is probably $110 million, right? So 1 month's worth of what these private sector companies are doing, right? Separately, the state utilities probably do $200 million of rebates a year, right? And those rebates, 80% of them go to the wealthiest, because they're the ones who are the most information, informed. And so what changes are you suggesting they make at the state energy office here in New Jersey? You guys are Princeton. You guys have all this expertise. What exactly are you suggesting that they do to make sure that 100% of all new air conditioners in the state of New Jersey switch to heat pumps, right? And play double duty and save natural gas. And you know the story as well as I do, right? But tell me where we're supposed to start. Does it start with the governor's office and then the state energy office? Does it start with like Ralph Izzo over at PSE&G and like say, hey, Ralph, you should figure this out, right? Do the Board of Public Utilities? Like, I don't know where I'm supposed to start. And then you separately have like the gas utility, right? NJI, who was the largest owner of solar power in the state of New Jersey and just sold off their entire portfolio probably like 3 years ago, right, in a securitization. And so maybe New Jersey Industries wants to get into heat pumps, right? I don't know. But like, this is the challenge, right? And then every mayor could probably do it if they wanted to, and do like a property tax, PACE financing if they wanted to, et cetera. And so this is the problem with industrial strategy is like who's supposed to lead and who's supposed to make sure that that money stretches farther, right? Because doing the strict math on the $4.3 billion in rebates we got for heat pumps, it's like 562,000 heat pumps, right? But RMI has said if you actually coordinate these 4 or 5 buckets of money, you can get to 7.2 million heat pumps, right? I'll give you one last problem, right, with heat pumps. So you've now got heat pump tax credits, right, as well. So now you're a financing company. What would you want to do with those tax credits? You'd want those tax credits assigned to you in the loan document, right? So you don't have to go back to the customer and get that. But no, probably not allowed. So now,
those are transferable.
Right, so I give you a loan, you actually get the tax credit, and then I make you pay a one-time, like $1,200 check to me, which by that point you're like, wait, that $1,200 was for you? I already spent it on something else. So it's, it's a lot of work. The implementation is not for the faint of heart.
This is for the rest of our lives, right? Let's open the conversation up to the audience here. I'd love to get your questions in here as well. I think we have a couple mics we can run around. Here we go. Lynn, you can kick us off.
Hi, Jigar. Lynn Liu. I'm a faculty here on
Hi.
LEAF, and I'm currently leading the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization in Singapore. So you've highlighted really effectively all the pain points and all the bottlenecks and all the challenges. And so now we understand how challenging the problems are and how complex the energy transition is going to be. Tell us something that we can do. Tell us something your office has to move things forward.
Thanks. It's a lot easier to complain.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that a lot of what we're doing is trying to bring clarity to a lot of these sectors, right? So in hydrogen, for instance, you have, 18 different business models that are pitched in the press. And so we've started going through them all and saying, here are the 3 that we actually see work. Here's why they work. And here's why they can be replicated. And then we're informing people of why those 3 are the right ones, right? And we're not suggesting the other 15 don't work.
No.
We're just saying that we haven't received any applications in the Loan Programs Office yet where someone has made it work. And so, these are the 3 that people have made it work, right? And so that then allows people to say, okay, if I'm doing a hydrogen hub, maybe I should copy these 3 models, right? And we've done similar things for carbon sequestration and storage, where we said, here are the models that have worked under the $85. Here's the models that haven't worked yet. Same thing's true for, we have like the 9 applications that have come in for fleet electrifications where people are converting entire fleets into electric vehicles, right? And so here's the models that work, here's the models that don't work. We have people who are trying to serve Uber and Lyft. Again, here's the models that work, here's the models that don't work. And so I think—
Is that like public information, or are you just that's conversations you're having within the industry as part of engagement?
The applications themselves and the existence of them are not public, right? So they have a right to privacy until we announce a loan with them. But we can abstract their models and publish those, right? And so so far we've written them up for an internal USG audience, US government audience. And then we're trying to get permission to be able to publish them now, so.
Okay. And what about universities? And that was the other part of Lynn's question. So what do what role can universities play to try to solve, one of these concrete challenges that we face?
Well, I mean, certainly there's lots of places where you can engage, but one of the places that I'd love to see universities engage is actually just to get these things done quicker, right? Universities, especially one like this one, is basically a small city, right? We have 19,500 communities in this country that are sort of duly constructed, and 14,500 of them have less than a population of 5,000, right?
Smaller than Princeton, right? Yeah.
So when you think about like how do you go to net zero trash, right? How do you figure out net zero transportation? How do you figure out net zero buildings? How do you figure out these things, right? Like you guys all have the same spreadsheet models I have around how cost effective it is, particularly with the rising commodity costs, right? Mm-hmm. And so then the question is, why can't we do this? Well, this person won't make a decision. This person has this issue. Well, how do you get past that, right? Like all the things you learn about how to do it here are like applicable to, the city council and...
Yeah, but I guess only if we document the lessons and try to share them with the world too.
Which is, I'm assuming, something you guys do.
Yep. Next question. Anybody else? Yep.
Thanks a lot for a fascinating conversation. I'm Toby Schmidt. I'm originally from Switzerland, but I'm here as a visiting fellow. And I have essentially two questions. One is about talent and people that you hire. So I'd be really interested in what kind of people you have. Apparently you need engineers, right, to understand the technologies, but you also need finance people. Banks don't have engineers usually, right? They outsource that stuff. So I was wondering, and do you get those talents? Do those people then also move on to banks and transfer the knowledge? And the other one is related to that, and that is because you said, I think you said what you do is peanuts compared to what the private sector banks do in terms of what they have to offer. So I was wondering, how much do you think your activity actually makes projects bankable? And I'm not saying because you developed the technology, but rather at the later stage, just because banks won't touch it because it's new. To what extent do you see that?
Yeah. So on the talent side, so we are the loan programs office, so we clearly have certain, jobs like people who actually process loans, right? Then we have the technology folks who evaluate the technologies and make sure they're innovative and make sure they'll work. But they leverage 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts on the DOE platform, right? So the national labs, others, and so some of what they do is the technical work, and some of what they do is know where the technical person is that they need to call. We have a risk group like a bank would have, which manages what's our likeliness of losing money on the loan. We have brought in a lot of people on the outreach and business development team, and they're doing a lot of the stuff that I was complaining about here, right? So they're going to people and saying, you got 45% of what you need to do this thing. Here's the other list of 12 things you have to do. And some folks get that list and feel overwhelmed and quit. And other people are like, I'm going to rise to the occasion and finish the 12. And so, Harry, who's sitting right over here, used to run Washington Gas Energy Services, and decided to join the team. And he, worked with some applicants for the better part of 12 to 16 months before their application came in, right? I mean, so it's a long haul, right? To get some of these folks in. But we do a lot of mentorship in that area. And then, Jonah Wagner, who's here in the third row, joined us from McKinsey. And he's been helping us figure out how to systematically take all these insights that we're getting from all of the applications and figure out how to spread them throughout government, but also within all the many podcasts and articles and other things that I do to try to educate people about things. And so, I mean, frankly, I would say if you're passionate and talented, we'll find a way to put you to work at the loan programs office. In terms of the catalyst role that we play in the banking sector, we are the single largest source of private debt for energy projects in the world, right? So we're bigger than any other institution in the world, including Citi or JP Morgan or anybody else in terms of the energy part of what we do, right? So we are very large. I'd say that in terms of what we do in terms of our discipline is so good, and we're so sort of strict about how we underwrite loans that I would say that pretty much anyone who goes through our office automatically gets invited to talk to commercial banks. And we've heard that directly from commercial banks who say...
Sort of a stamp of approval.
Absolutely. Well, and an educator, right? I mean, if you talk to Rob Hansen at Monolith Materials, right? He'll tell you that he was wholly unprepared when he came through our office, and that we, through all of our questions and answers, really educated him on how the debt process works. Mm-hmm. And now he's more prepared for the debt markets because, many of these folks are experts at raising equity, right? They've raised $100, $250 million of equity. But equity is about what you're going to do in the future, right? Like not what you've done in the past.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Matt Levinger from George Washington University. In my talk this morning, I talked about the importance of transforming incentive structures so that there are a wider circle of winners from energy transition as opposed to people who are just losing less. I was struck by your real estate seminar metaphor. I'm wondering, what could that look like to kind of get a whole lot of grassroots level winners from energy transition? And for your own organization, you talked about Solyndra and Tesla. So the whole loan program was branded a failure, a boondoggle, because of Solyndra. In the political sphere, had Tesla been, had you been able to profit off Tesla, it would have looked like a big winner economically. Would there be a benefit to transforming your loan program, guaranteed loan program, into more of a venture capital model for the government, and would that be feasible?
Yeah, great question. So in the first question, the way I'd answer it is, we lost, Barbara Einrich this year, and she was the one who wrote Nickel and Dimed back in the 90s, and I think it turned into a Broadway play and all sorts of stuff. I think when you talk about Nickel and Dimed, the underlying premise of Nickel and Dimed is that poor people pay more than rich people for basic services, right? And so there's lots of ways for us to solve that problem through our money, right? And I think that in general, we get super excited about shiny stuff, like giving people vouchers for housing or figuring out a way to get people electric vehicles or EV chargers in poor neighborhoods or whatever it is. But when you fundamentally look at it, the US of A, we spend about $120 billion a year on appliances and HVAC. 43% of that's LMI. The average interest rate that those people pay is between 15 and 30%. Because they don't have the cash and they don't want to waste $75 worth of food that might go bad in their refrigerator. And so they're already paying these interest rates, and we can drop that down to 6 with our program, right? And so it's a pretty straightforward thing to solve these problems, but I find that like instead of being data-driven about what people need, there's always this performative aspect of how you get credit for looking like you're helping somebody. And so we've worked really hard at the Loan Programs Office to be very focused on those kinds of things, both in vehicles as well as on appliances, and making sure that what we're doing with our loan guarantees is actually helping, LMI customers get access to the same credit that everyone else gets access to, and working with, folks that they trust to make sure that we're getting a stamp of approval and a lot of that stuff. There's lots of other places that we can go through in that area. But I would suggest that we spend a lot of money on things that, frankly, don't actually solve this nickel and dime problem.
So, but say you solve that problem, how do people know that the government helped solve that problem?
I don't know that I care.
No?
Honestly,
I think that's important to sustain the
No, I think if we do this right, which I think we will, we'll probably put out about $100 billion worth of loan guarantees to help poor people over the next 4 years. And I think that I'm fine with that. I don't care if anyone knows or not. So I think that's on that front. In terms of the venture capital side, I'd say that no, I don't think we should do it. The federal government in general doesn't need to make money, right? We print money. So as people who follow modern monetary theory can attest. And so I don't think making additional money makes any sense. No one would have said Solyndra was fine if we made $2 billion of profit on Tesla. It's entirely around political theater art. It's not about the actual facts underlying the case. And so the only reason we would ask for warrants, which we might do, is because there are certain risks that there are no other way for a bank to protect itself from, but one that we need to do in the national interest to make sure that these things move forward. And so in that case, you would actually identify the risk, ask everyone for warrants, so that the failures get covered by the folks who make an extra payment. But to date, we haven't, we've brought it up a couple times, but we've never actually had to use it, because we could use a reserve account, we could use other mechanisms that are more established to protect ourselves from that. And just, from a point of fact, so the existing loan authority is the existing loan book is $31 billion. We put $5 billion of credit subsidy to the side in case of losses. So let's call it a loan loss reserve. We've in total lost roughly a little bit less than $1.1 billion. We've made $4.2 billion of net interest payments, right? And on those loans, we will probably earn an additional $6 billion of interest payments by the time those loans are completed.
You
right?
are making money.
So we are making a crap load of money for the federal government. So it's not, it has nothing to do with how much money we make.
Other questions? Maybe time for one more? Yeah.
Hi, Jesse, Jigar. Great conversation, thanks. I'm Paris. I recently graduated with my PhD here. I now work with Mercator Partners, so we invest across the decarbonization space. But my question's interested in domestic supply chains. So with the IRA, you have all these incentives, and you've seen all this additional announced capacity for things like cell manufacturing and solar manufacturing and so on. Now your conversation over the tech experience and needing that, as well as how some of these people, especially like cell manufacturers who are going to be dependent on critical material supply chains, which are increasingly constrained. I'm just wondering to get your perspective a little bit on how you think, where the problems might start, what sort of additional conversations need to be had, and how those industries need to prepare in order to make sure that they deliver the products to decarbonize like we hope.
Yeah, it's not a quick answer. So I'll try to keep it short, and then we can maybe talk later. So let's just do batteries, because it's probably easier. So clearly in the EV tax credit, there was a provision put in there where you have to source everything locally or else or from a free trade agreement. Otherwise, you can't get the $7,500 tax credit. We're building 800 gigawatt hours worth of battery capacity in this country, right? Just from the announced things, right? That's basically what you need to meet the president's 50% goal by 2030.
Yeah, I just verified that actually.
There you go.
Yep.
And so now those people need, I think what you're
Sure.
suggesting, like lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, iron, phosphate, right? And so so we've mapped all that out, right? And then there's three mappings, right? So you have USGS, US Geological Survey. Then you've got the Advanced Manufacturing Office at DOE, which is slightly less theoretical. Like USGS is more like, here's how many barrels you have under the ground sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then you've got AMO, which is like, here's the technologies you would use to get those out of the ground. And then what we do is actually then, because we're funding all of those plants, so we have about $6 billion or so of active applications in critical minerals. And so we're saying, but these are the ones who actually have folks who are chasing them. like you might say that there's deposit here, but I haven't found anybody who has raised equity that's going after it, right? And so, so then we're mapping that now and then projecting when we'll have enough lithium to, to meet the needs of our domestic manufacturing, and then graphite, which was the announcement we made in Vidalia that's bringing ore from Mozambique, right? And then you've got cobalt that's being mined right now in Idaho. And so we're mapping all that out and then figuring out whether it's enough or not, right? And then there's the Loan Programs Office, there's the Defense Production Act at the Department of Defense for critical minerals, and other tools that then we're mapping, right? And then if those tools are insufficient, well, then we would tell somebody that we think they're insufficient. We don't know yet whether they're insufficient, so we're going through that now.
Well, I think we're at the end of our allotted hour. Thank you, Jigar, for a fascinating conversation. Many, many challenges ahead. I hope all of you are putting your shoulder into it and trying to tackle some of these challenges going forward. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Jigar for joining us.